If you've spent any time here in France, you'll know that the French love to eat meat.
Whether it's coq au vin, bœuf bourguignon, steak tartare, foie gras, quiche Lorraine, duck, rabbit, all our famous dishes are meat heavy. The joke goes, it's hard to be a vegetarian in France.
But more and more people are becoming concerned about their health or the environment, and so their meat-eating habits are starting to change.
Join us for this episode of French Connections Plus, where we take a bite out of France's sizzling love affair with meat.
Be it pork, poultry, or beef, the French certainly love their viande. However, the amount of meat people eat has certainly changed over the years.
Well, I remember back in the day, my grandparents used to say that just after the war, meat was still a treat. It became commonplace in the 1970s, and then 20 years ago, it hit a high point when people were eating about 94 kilos of meat a year per person.
That is a lot of meat, but things changed over the past decade, with meat consumption dropping more than 10%.
That's right. These days, it's closer to about 86 kilos of meat per year per person, which is still higher than the European average.
French health officials recommend eating less meat, particularly processed meat, to things like cold cuts.
Well, someone like my father, who used to eat meat twice a day, he's also cutting back, preferring quality over quantity.
So what kind of meat are people eating these days?
Well, pork is the king of meat in France, and you can also find it in a lot of delicious deli meats, charcuterie like saucisson and pâté. Next comes poultry, then beef, and then lamb.
So that's what the numbers say, but how do the French feel about their relationship with meat? Flo, you went to find out more.
Je mange de la viande de 3 à 4 fois par semaine.
Non, j'ai jamais été une grande consommatrice de viande.
Je suis végétarienne depuis 2 ans.
3 fois par semaine.
Je suis végétarienne depuis 5 ans à peu près.
Par semaine, 2 fois, de la viande rouge uniquement.
Comme j'ai des enfants, j'essaie de varier.
Du poulet 2 fois par semaine.
Par exemple, une fois de la viande rouge par semaine et viande blanche et poisson le reste du temps.
Du bœuf, du poulet.
Beaucoup de viande rouge, l'agneau, le mouton.
J'en mange moins.
Même ma grand-mère qui commence à me dire qu'elle mange moins de viande pour aller vers d'autres aliments.
C'est plein de choses en même temps finalement, la cause écologique et aussi la santé finalement quoi, ça se rejoint.
Les mentalités évoluent, c'est chouette.
C'est peut-être devenu plus raisonné, plus pensé, mais ça reste quand même dans les habitudes de consommation française, ouais.
J'essaie d'acheter le poulet, c'est uniquement du poulet bio.
Il faut toujours voir si ça vient, en plus si ça vient de la France, parce que je sais très bien qu'ici, on respecte bien les règles.
Je préfère acheter ma viande chez un boucher, voir la provenance de la bête, l'origine.
Quand on voit les abattoirs, ça fait réfléchir.
Ouais, le bœuf bourguignon, bien sûr.
La choucroute.
C'est le beefsteak grillé avec des frites.
Une côte de bœuf, ça c'est bien.
La viande, c'est très bon, mais avec modération.
Part of the reason meat consumption, and in particular beef consumption, has dropped in the past decade is due to a series of public health scandals.
Well, people still remember the mad cow disease, vache folle health crisis that shook the 90s. It made people become more aware of where their meat comes from and how it's raised.
More recently, France was rocked by a scandal involving horse meat showing up in certain frozen lasagna.
And it certainly caused a media rodeo. But here's the thing, horse meat is considered a delicacy by many.
Horse meat was very popular in France, at least until the 1980s. Then people became more aware of animal rights campaigns.
There's still butchers that sell horse meat, like here in Paris, and you can often recognize them thanks to a horse head statue outside.
Fun fact, the original steak tartare, which is basically raw meat mixed with a bunch of spices, was originally made with horse meat. Today, it's made with beef, and it's just one of the many ways the French enjoy their steak.
A classic order on the menu of French brasseries, steak tartare was named for the Turkic Tartars, a nomadic population living in Central Asia in the Middle Ages. Legend has it they would tenderize horse meat under their riding saddles before consuming it raw. While raw meat is not to everyone's liking, the French do tend to eat their meat rarer than in other countries, and it can be tricky to order your steak just the way you like it. Bleu will get you a very rare steak, lightly seared on either side. Saignant, literally bloody, is what the French consider rare, but it can be a bit undercooked by British or American standards, in which case you should order your steak à point. If you want it well done, order it bien cuit or even très bien cuit, but you might get a disapproving look from the waiter and a steak that looks more like a strip of leather. Meanwhile, the different names for meat cuts can be a real head-scratcher, and at times get lost in translation. The best thing is to ask your local butcher, who will probably give you a delicious recipe along the way.
French people love their meat, but the number of vegetarians and vegans, those who eat no animal products at all, is growing.
Now, there have been stories in the news of militant vegans attacking butcher shops, but when you look at the numbers, it's still quite a small movement.
Just 2% of French people say they're vegetarian, 0.5% say they're vegan, but 30% say they are flexitarian, mostly vegetarian who eat a little bit of meat.
Now, in recent years, the trend of Meatless Monday or Un jour sans viande has caught on for many people, and more restaurants are offering vegetarian options on their menus.
Now that is a real revolution here in France. Back in the day, if you asked for a vegetarian dish at a French restaurant, chances are good they'd probably give you ham.
Now, France still has a ways to go compared to its neighboring countries, Germany and the UK, that are a lot more veggie-friendly. But things are starting to get better for vegetarians and vegans.
In fact, the prestigious Michelin Guide just gave one of its prize stars to a French vegan restaurant, and this for the first time ever in France.
That being said, meat-based dishes are still the prime rib of the culinary world, and there's some classic dishes that everyone should know how to make. When you think about a typical meaty French dish, one of the first ones that pops to mind is bœuf bourguignon.
Bœuf bourguignon comes from the Bourgogne region of France, Burgundy, a place that's famous for its wine and its beef. So it's no surprise those are the two main ingredients.
And the other key ingredient is thyme, because the longer it simmers, the better it tastes.
There are as many recipes as there are grandmas in France, but today we decided to do a very simple version.
On top of the beef and wine, you're going to need onions, carrots, garlic, flour, lardons, mushrooms, aromatic herbs, butter, salt, pepper, oil, and a secret ingredient we're going to get to in just a little bit.
And the best thing to cook it all in is a good old-fashioned cast iron pot. Step 1, cut up the beef into 5-centimeter cubes, that's about 2 inches, and then chop up the carrots and the onions.
All right. Heat some oil in the pot and throw in the meat and some butter. The idea is to darken the meat, but especially to get the juices flowing, because that's where all the flavor is.
Once the meat has browned, you take it out. Then you put in the chopped garlic, carrots, and onion, and you cook it for about 5 minutes. Once they've sautéed, put the meat back in with some salt and pepper and butter.
Because you can never have enough butter. Now, at this point, you're going to sprinkle the meat with some flour. It's going to give the dish a good consistency. Now, you lower the heat and add the wine.
You can use any red wine, but it is best to use Burgundy. This is, after all, a bœuf bourguignon. If not, use any Pinot variety, which is fruity and slightly acidic.
Once you've poured the wine in the pot, let it reduce to about half. That way, all the alcohol evaporates. Add some aromatic herbs like bay leaves and thyme, and then cover it for 2 hours minimum.
Then, in another pan, cook your lardons, basically chopped up bacon, and mushrooms, and then add them into the big pot about halfway through. And that's before you add the secret ingredient,
which is 2 squares of dark chocolate. Now, chefs use chocolate to give the dish creaminess, also a cocoa-flavored note, and also to calm down the acidity of the wine. After about 2.5 to 3 hours, the dish is ready to serve, often with some boiled potatoes.
It's not very clear when bœuf bourguignon was invented, but it has always been a festive meal.
It's the ultimate comfort food, what we call a plat du dimanche, an elaborate hearty meal you make for a long Sunday lunch with your family. Bon appétit!
Bon appétit!
Yum, pretty good.
Many of you sent in your questions about meat eating habits here in France, like Philippe Montet, who wanted to know, are the French still eating a lot of snails and frogs, or is that just cliche?
Well, I guess technically snails and frog legs are meat. No, it's not at all a cliche. It might sound a little hard to stomach, but it's actually considered a delicacy. And usually you will order snails and frog legs in old school restaurants like here at the Café du Commerce. And it might sound a little gross, but it's actually delicious, probably thanks to all the butter and garlic they're usually cooked in.
Speaking of things that are delicious, but also a bit of an acquired taste, Matteo Demita wanted to know how to prepare andouillette.
Now, andouillette is a sausage that's made with the small intestine of a pork and usually the colon as well, which gives it a distinctive odor. But you know what? It actually tastes a lot better than it smells, luckily. And my favorite way to eat it is grilled on a barbecue.
Now, if you want to order or buy andouillette, be sure to look out for a lot of A's. That's a very good sign. It stands for the Association Amicale des Amateurs d'Andouillette Authentique. It's sort of a fan club that gives certificates to producers of only the best andouillettes.
I don't know about you, Genie, but all this is making me very hungry.
Me too. Listen, if you want to get in touch with us, feel free to send us your questions at Villeminot or to check us out on social media.
And we'll see you soon for another episode of French Connections Plus.